Have you ever looked at the back of a dollar bill? If you have one handy, take it out, or you can just look at this picture. The bill shows the front and the back of the Great Eagle, or the Great Seal, the eagle on one side, and a pyramid on the left, an unfinished pyramid with the eye of God looking over it, and the words Annuit Coeptus. He, God, favors our undertaking. The seal is meant to be unfinished because this country is meant to be unfinished. We are meant to be doing better and keep doing better, which seems an awfully short supply right now. It's hard to see the moral arc of the universe bending toward justice here in the early 21st century when over and over we're being dragged back to the late 19th. Voting restrictions, racism, robber barons, and income inequality, science denial. It's enough to make some want to give up and leave. In a recent article from religion writer John Pavlovich, he confesses to regularly dreaming about leaving it all behind, about beginning again somewhere else, about escaping the coming flood of fascism that seems unstoppable, avoiding my increasingly hateful neighbors and cutting off my untethered family members. And yet, Pavlovich and Lovich and many of us with that option choose to stay, to see this through. And it's right that we stay, that we do the things that are hard, that we weather these storms of uncertainty and looking backwards and keep working to bend that moral arc because it's right. And because it's what we've always done. In fact, it's what we have always promised. We are meant to be unfinished. We are meant to be doing better. And it's a message we hear over and over again from some of the most striking writing about the United States of America, namely the words of the inaugural poets. I've thought a lot about them since this past inauguration, with those incredible words of Amanda Gorman still ringing in my ear, and how these poems speak a truth about who we are and could be as a nation. So, along with the pomp and circumstance and the ritual and tradition, presidential inaugurations are this important moment to set a direction, an intention, a focus. It is often the last time we hear visionary language from someone who must now leave behind the poetry and govern in prose. For some, the vision is encapsulated in the patriotic rituals and patriotic songs, and that idealized vision is enough. But for others, the vision is less idealized, less definable. And so they invite a poet whose words, especially in times of great difficulty, invite us in some way to reconcile us to our world, to allow us a measure of tenderness and grace with which to exist. Now, it wasn't always this way. Inaugurations have been public events since George Washington, and when technology allowed, were broadcast on the radio and then television. But it wasn't until 1961 that a poet was included. John F. Kennedy, much like Joe Biden, was inclined to finish speeches with lines of poetry, and he understood the power of the still fairly new TV medium better than his predecessors. And he knew poetry would cut through the political rhetoric and help set a tone heard by the nation. Now, some of you may know this story that Robert Frost, who was asked to compose a poem for the occasion, wrote a longer piece called Dedication that has specific references to Kennedy in the context of America's own evolution from colony to superpower, and how there was still a place for art in the scientific age. Yet on the day, a combination of age, poor eyesight, and blinding sun reflecting on the snow meant that Frost could not read the words in front of him. And so instead, he recited the shorter A Gift Outright from memory, which not only made for great television, but also set the tone that Kennedy sought more metaphorically.
Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright to the land, vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced. Such as she was, such as she will become.
Which asks the question Kennedy answers with, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Jimmy Carter was the next to invite a poet, and although James Dickey was excluded from the actual inauguration ceremony, he recited The Strength of Fields at the Kennedy Center Gala later that night. Imagine if we had heard these lines on that crisp January morning.
Lord, let me shake with purpose. Wild hope can always spring from tended strength. Everything is in that and nothing but kindness. More kindness, dear Lord, of the renewing green. That is where it all has to start, with the simplest things. More kindness will do nothing less than save every sleeping one and night walking one of us. My life belongs to the world. I will do what I can.
Poetry appeared again as if a breath of fresh air at Bill Clinton's 1992 inaugural. Maya Angelou's On the Pulse of the Morning was not just an indictment of the disastrous Gulf War, and it was not just a message to the new president who came from a place called Hope. It was a message to all of us.
You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouths spilling words armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face.
Angelou exhorted us and captivated us. And as poet Percy Shelley writes, purge from our inward sight the film of familiarity, which obscures from us the wonder of our being. In other words, bypassing the common rhetoric and the all too familiar language of politics and speaking directly to our hearts. Continuing the conversation was Miller Fields at Clinton's second inaugural.
We have memorized America, how it was born, and who we have been and where. But where are we going to be? And why? And who? The disenfranchised dead want to know. We mean to be the people we meant to be, to keep on going where we meant to go.
12 years later, Barack Obama's inaugural poet, Elizabeth Alexander, drew our attention from the huge problems we could not solve alone: ongoing war, recession, racial tensions, and back to what we've been missing: each other.
Each day we go about our business, walking past each other, catching each other's eyes or not, about to speak or speaking. All about us is noise. All about us is noise and bramble, thorn and din, each one of our ancestors on our tongues.
And 4 years later, Richard Blanco, who was our 2019 Ware lecturer at General Assembly in Spokane, reinforced that theme.
My face, your face, millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes, and oranges arrayed like rainbows begging our praise. Silver trucks heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us, on our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives. To teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years, so I could write this poem.
We hear truth in these poems, deep truths about who we are and who we want to become. But the poet's job isn't to tell the truth. As Aaron Sorkin's character Tabitha Fortis says, the poet's job is to captivate you for however long we've asked for your attention. If we stumble into truth, we got lucky, and I don't get to decide what truth is. And sometimes the truth, even the truth stumbled upon, is impossible to bear. As poet Mina Alexander writes in her essay, What Use is Poetry? There have been moments in our shared human history where poets and singers have been banned. But why? What is there to fear? Precisely this: the force of the quicksilver self that poetry sets free. desire that can never be bound by laws and legislations. This is the force of the human, the spirit level of our lives. It is perhaps notable who did and did not have poets at their inaugurations, and this isn't the place for this kind of political analysis, but I think it says something about competing visions, about what tone a president needs to set in order to do the hard work that faces them, what they need to inspire in the nation, in us. And so we have this growing body of inaugural poetry meant to speak to us in ways that prose cannot, meant to cut through the rhetoric and saying the unsayable directly to our heart in language that is used all the time and all around us, in sound bites, advertisements, political rhetoric, newsprint. A poet takes our language and shifts it, molds it, and the poem in its act of meaning making turns away from the literal, its truth bound to what can be evoked. As Amanda Gorman noted in an interview with Anderson Cooper, she got the line, "We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it," from looking at tweets and messages and articles and seeing what stood out, and then turning into a piece of art that cut through the medium so we could hear the truth of what needed to be heard. We already know the power of poetry in our faith. Even those who don't access poetry easily welcome poems as opening readings and meetings and covenant groups. We fill our worship services with Mary Oliver and Wendell Berry, and yes, Maya Angelou. These are our sacred texts that inspire us and hold us. We sing hymns that are full of poetry, often are poems set to music. We use the language of poetry in our meditations and prayers, Spirit of life, divine creator, holy one, infinite all. The poetry sets a tone that this is something special, something sacred, something true, something connected not just to our minds, but to our hearts. Sometimes the poetry we lean into is lyric, metaphorical, talking of wild geese and the flow of hair and the plums that were in the icebox. And sometimes the poetry is stronger, faster, more urgent. We saw this at Biden's inauguration when, as author Tracy Dion wrote on Twitter, Amanda Gorman didn't recite poetry as much as she rained poetry down upon us. It's not a mistake that our newest poet laureate is a slam poet, a rap poet, a beat poet. It's not a mistake that her poetry is full of wordplay and linguistic urgency. In a time when words have been assigned alternate meanings, when the specter of Orwellian doublespeak has been on full display, Gorman reclaims for us the power of words to mean what we need them to mean. We know all too well that those who control the words control the world. And so Gorman controls the words and reclaims them for us. The rhythm comes in slant and the meaning becomes clear. She writes, for example, we've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just is isn't always justice. It is the truth we need right now evoked. And yet it was not just truth laid bare. Gorman, like the poets she follows, held open that same door that Frost first opened, the unfinished nation. She writes this.
And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man.
We hear this in Blanco.
We head home through the gloss of rain or weight of snow or the plum blush of dusk, but always home, always under one sky, our sky, and always one moon like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one country, all of us facing the stars. Hope, a new constellation waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together.
We hear it in Alexander.
In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun. On the brink, on the brim, on the cusp, praise song for walking forward in that light.
And of course, where we began, in the frost.
But still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she will become.
We are not finished and we are not polished. We see our growth as we look back at the words of these poets spanning 56 years, revealing the outdated and outmoded ways we understood ourselves. Frost and even Angelo seem outdated now, as Gorman one day will, because we continue to grow and change and bend that moral arc bit by little bit. And it is good news that we are not finished, not the United States, not our communities, not our congregations, not ourselves. But we are, as we ever were, aspirational. Our own Unitarian Universalism is many things, but it is perhaps most significantly an aspirational faith, a faith of vision, a faith of imagination, a faith of hope. From our Unitarian belief in unity to our Universalist belief in one loving God and the exhortation to love the hell out of this world, to care for one another, and make the world a more just, equitable, and compassionate place. This faith is full of hope. And that hope is not wrapped up in a tiny bow. We are covenantal, which means it is about relationship, growing, changing. Revelation is not sealed, we say, and that's not just about the big truths, but about all that is our lives. This is who we are, a people who believe there will be better days, a people who can imagine the beloved community and participate in making it so it matters. We are people who believe we can come back to the table when things go wrong and do better the next time. We are a people who believe we can build a new way, and that's never finished. The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and it bends slowly, and I don't know if it will ever fully get there. Like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's elusive, but always calling, always promising. And this poetry we've explored today gets us there, helping us to reconcile us to the world, not to accept it at face value or to assent to things that are wrong, but to reconcile one to a larger sense, to return us in love, the province of the imagination, to the scope of our mortal lives. This is the call of the poets, and this is the call of our faith. This is the call of humanity. May we be bold enough to answer the call. One way we can answer it is to affirm in our hymn 1017, building a new way.